Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Melissa Tipton, and she's here to share with us her new book, Living Reiki, Heal Yourself and Transform Your Life. Now, Melissa is a tarot reader, Reiki master, and licensed massage therapist. She's been practicing yoga for over a decade and discovered that complements very well with ancient wisdom and with energy healing. So let's welcome to the show, Melissa Tipton.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm happy to be here.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. And so I have to ask you, my goodness, because your book is filled with so much great information when we talk about Reiki, what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the main things that I found was lacking in my early experiences in Reiki was it was something that I was really approaching as a practice that I would experience if I went to go get a Reiki session, for example. But beyond that, I wasn't really using Reiki to change my life. And it took, many months, years before I truly came to realize how impactful Reiki really is. And so in Living Reiki, I outline teachings that are typically covered in the traditional Reiki classes, but I blend them with a 7-step process of self-transformation. So this is really designed to help people create powerful, lasting change in their life using their Reiki practice.
Well, and for our listeners that are new to Reiki, what is Reiki?
Yeah, so Reiki, the word, it's typically translated as spiritual energy, sometimes universal energy, but in the West, that word is often used to denote a really specific healing system that uses this universal energy. And this system traces its origins back to early 1900s Japan to a man named Mikao Usui. So there are so many different systems of Reiki today, but they often include a few shared points. So one, there's usually some form of hands-on healing, and there's often an attunement process. And there's debate as to what exactly is going on in the attunement process, but some people see this as a way to open someone up to the energy of Reiki so that they can channel Reiki, for example, in the context of a hands-on healing. Other people believe, though, that we all already have the ability to channel Reiki, and that the attunement is really just a way of strengthening and developing this ability. So that, in a nutshell, is what most systems of Reiki nowadays have in common.
Well, and it's interesting when people look at Reiki, we're made up of energy, and
Yes.
a lot of it is, knowing how to move and to affect that energy.
I definitely agree. Yes. That is a huge part of Reiki, and we've been given so many wonderful techniques, some that go back all the way back to Usui, others that have been developed over the decades from other practitioners for doing exactly that, of really becoming sensitive to the energy that's within us and around us and learning ways to effectively work with that energy. And that's, one of the things that I have found to be so powerful with Reiki, because before that, quite honestly, I didn't really give my energy much thought. It was certainly having a huge impact on every day, but I didn't really know how to work with that. And that's what I love about Reiki is now I have so many tools that I can share with other people as well to, if you're having a day where you're just in a funk, there's a lot of things you can do to really lift your energy up and just get back on track.
I think that's so encouraging for people, that they have a way that they can make positive changes in their life and just by starting on our energetic bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the interesting things, too, about Reiki is that as we start working with that energy, and maybe it does start out with, we're just having a bad day and we want to do something to kind of turn our mood around. But there's something, and I couldn't entirely put it into words, it's this mystery of Reiki that it really starts to work with us on this really deep, deep level. And it transforms our life in ways that, quite honestly, I find to be miraculous, ways that I could never predict, when a client first walks into my door, how Reiki is going to affect them ultimately. And that's what's so amazing. Reiki, it really addresses us right where we are in each moment and gives us what we need in that moment to truly heal.
Now, for our listeners that are new to Reiki and they're listening and very interested in thinking about getting the book, do they have to know Reiki first? Or is this something that, getting living Reiki is something that can walk them through that practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in writing Living Reiki, I designed it so that people who are very, very new to the practice can use the book to really get a solid foundation in the material that they might receive if they were to take a traditional Reiki class. And I include information from, usually traditional teachings are divided into 3 levels, and I include teachings from all 3 of those levels. That said, for practitioners who are more seasoned, there's also a lot of material in the book that will allow you to go deeper with the teachings. For example, in Reiki, there's often symbols that are used. And in my Reiki instruction, for example, I was given a pretty basic understanding of the symbols. And over the years of using Reiki, I've come to understand that each of the symbols almost, you could say, represents like an entire universe unto itself. And so in the book, I offer a lot of really straightforward, simple practices so that people can go deeper if they already have experience with Reiki.
That's a very encouraging thing because I know, your book is so filled with so much information, just going through it. And I know a little bit about Reiki, but going through it, it really kind of provides like a baseline of where to start from. And so you kind of walks you through what to kind of expect.
Yeah, that was definitely my goal. I know in my own healing practice, I meet a lot of clients who have never even heard of Reiki, but something in them, when they find out about it, they're just a little bit curious. But it can be a little bit intimidating. It's like, what on earth is going to happen in a session? And so in the book, I really try and bring Reiki down to earth. There's so much about it that is just very transcendent and spiritual, of course, but there's so much about it, too, where the power really comes in integrating it in just to the stuff of our day-to-day life. And that's really where a lot of the good stuff happens. And I'm really passionate about just finding ways so that people can use Reiki, on their commute to work or when they're in the middle of a work meeting, that sort of thing.
Being able to use it in their daily lives. Well, and I'm glad you kind of touched on the transformation part because I know your book is big about using Reiki to move us to that self-transformation. So what does it look like?
Yeah, so in the book, of course, there are so many different ways to approach self-transformation, but in the book, I developed a 7-step process just to make this big kind of unwieldy topic of transformation more practical and more accessible. So in brief, the 7 steps, they begin with illumination. So this is where we begin to shed light on different elements in our psyche that are cluttering our consciousness. So things like defense mechanisms, projections, and just other constructs of the ego that make it difficult to see ourselves and everything and everyone around us as divine. So from there, step 2, this is submersion. This is where we go deeper by really building a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious selves. And this really is at the heart of the book and all 7 steps, because by creating a more productive dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious minds, we feel whole. We remember, in essence, our true self. So from there, step 3, polarization. This is where we heighten our awareness of what I call our inner duality. In the book, I frame this duality in part as the conscious and the unconscious mind. Another variation might be the duality of doing versus being. As I see it, the world we live in is powered by relationships between these dualities, like the charges of a battery. So if we get stuck in seeing one pole as good and the other bad, in whatever forms we experience polarity, you, me, us, them, so on and so forth, we dismantle this battery and we feel this as a loss of energy and purpose and clarity, and often through increased conflict that we might experience in various aspects of our lives. So from there, we go to step 4, merging. And this is where we initially start to unite these polar forces that we encountered in the previous step. We start to experiment with blending these energies, which gives birth to what Egyptian alchemists referred to as the intelligence of the heart, and I just love that phrase. So we could view this as uniting the powers of our intellect and our intuition, which produces this way of knowing that is far greater than the sum of its parts. We then have the fifth step, inspiration. This takes the creative potential generated by merging these polarities, and it animates it with divine energy. So this introduces elements that are beyond our ability to plan for or control. And this element of divine surprise, it challenges the ego's delusion that it's the one in charge. And we start to see that by loosening our control on our life, rather than leading to our doom and destruction, as the ego might have us believe, instead it invites the magic back in. And we're able to experience things that we could never possibly orchestrate from the ego, no matter how hard we might try. So this then brings us to the sixth step, refinement. And this takes the inspired state of being and purifies it even further, continuing to remove more layers of ego constructs that would otherwise cloud our ability to see our true self. Because often, when we're really expanding and stepping out of our comfort zone, as we're doing in these steps, that's when the ego tries to rally the forces of the internal status quo. And refinement helps us to continue expanding even when we're dealing with fear of the unknown and a loss of control. So finally, step 7, integration. This completes the process by uniting these distilled or purified parts of ourselves into a vibrant whole, allowing us to experience on a really deep level the sense of internal oneness, rather than feeling maybe scattered or at odds within our own self. And we also enjoy a sense of oneness with all of existence. So said more pragmatically, in this step, we take this state of enlightened consciousness we have worked hard to craft through the previous 6 steps, and we weave it into the very fabric of our day-to-day lives. So it's not something we experience only when we're on a meditation cushion or in a yoga class. So all in summary, these steps, they're all ways of bringing us closer and closer to realizing our true self.
And it really sounds like it takes people on a path to greater spiritual enlightenment, whatever that means for them, because it's such, once you start on that path, it is such a journey.
Yes, I would agree. It's definitely, this process came from my own journey that had plenty of twists and turns and ups and downs. And this is essentially the book that I wish that I had had when I was kind of mucking my way through this process.
Well, and so for our listeners that are new to you, how long have you been on this journey, using Reiki as part of your life?
Yeah, so Reiki, I've probably been using it, I'm trying to think of the dates here, so for about 6 or 7 years is when I started my formal study, but the process goes back longer than that, when I began experimenting with different forms of energy work that eventually led me to really wanting to do a more formal study in Reiki.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so one of the steps that you talked about illumination,
mm-hmm.
As part. Why don't you kind of expand on that a little bit more? Because what is that in Reiki?
Yeah, so, and I do want to make clear, so these steps here, this is not something that would be found in a traditional Japanese Reiki class. So there are some people who are sticklers, I guess I would say, for what is and isn't traditional Reiki. And illumination is not traditional Reiki, but it is something that I have found to be very powerful in conjunction with Reiki. The reason being, so illumination, again, this is where we really start to see these things, these thoughts, these ideas that we have that are really preventing us from seeing our true self. So these might be roles that we have, maybe in our relationships, at work, in society in general. They could be defense mechanisms that we're not even aware that we're using. They could be aspects of ourselves that, for various reasons, we're uncomfortable seeing, so we project them onto other people or the world around us. And Reiki, I have found, is so powerful in being able to show us what these things are, but in a way that is gentle and aligned with our highest good. So we're not just wallowing in all these things that are wrong with us, so to speak. It's like Reiki keeps peeling away layer after layer in the spirit of love to help us see our true self. instead of looking at us through the eyes of the ego, which is just so very, very narrow in comparison to the fullness of who we really are.
Well, you talk about peeling away layer by layer, or is that done more in a loving, kind of stance? Because I know a lot of times when people start their spiritual path, the things that we look at can be, we can be like, oh, great, now I've got this. I can't believe that's
Sure.
Oh, did that again,
Yes, absolutely. So I do think in part it is important for us to adopt an attitude of self-compassion. I mean, there's a piece of it that's our responsibility. But I've also found that Reiki is just really helpful in bringing us into that place. So one practical example would be if you know that you're going to do some, potentially challenging self-inquiry, it'd be really great to give yourself just a mini Reiki treatment before you do that. Because for me and for a lot of my clients as well, like Reiki just brings us into this place where it's kind of like taking a spiritual chill pill. It's like everything is fine. And it's not like all butterflies and roses, but it's just like we know that ultimately everything is going to be okay. Even the challenging things, they're coming up for a reason. And we're well equipped, especially with the support of Reiki, to respond to them.
It gives us that tool that we can walk through, looking at these things without really being so judgmental.
Absolutely, yes. And going back to some of the original teachings of Reiki from Mikao Usui, Usui left us a number of tools from the Reiki symbols and the mantras to, again, just the hands-on healing techniques and something called the 5 precepts that, there's so many different things in the system of Reiki that can support us in just staying in this place of non-judgment and compassion, not only for ourselves, but for other people.
What a beautiful place to come from, especially when we can look at ourselves with the same compassion that we would, other people, those around us. It's really interesting to be very compassionate and easy to be compassionate to people who we care about, but sometimes to ourselves it's like, ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is actually a big piece of the book, is doing work on ourselves first and foremost, and then the benefits just naturally overflow to affect the people in our life. I just know as a healer, if I don't take care of myself, I have truly nothing to give to my clients. I really would just be phoning it in. And I feel like no matter what we do in our lives, if we're not practicing self-care, we aren't able to live our best self. And so that really, even in traditional Reiki practice, the first level, it's very focused on self-healing before you even start doing any healing for other people, because Mikao Usui himself realized that if you can't do this work for yourself, you can't effectively do it for other people.
Mm-hmm. It's always really easy to try to fix the other person than us, right?
Yes.
I've heard about that before, where people will go to counseling going, I need to fix him, or her, or whatever. It's like, ooh, really need to start with you.
Yeah, let's start over here. And I, part of what went into this book was actually my own experiences in therapy, and that was a huge theme of continually coming back to like, okay, I got to work on myself. And that's a big part of the 7 steps, is really just gently bringing our focus with compassion back to ourselves, because that's where we are most effective in terms of transformation.
Able to move things forward. Well, you touched on something when we first started this discussion. You talked about attunement. So what does that mean as far as attunement goes? And what would some of the challenges that, because I know there's challenges that we face with attunement, what would some of those look like?
Yeah, so in attunement, and again, especially with modern day Reiki, because there's so many different systems, different people have different perspectives on this, but at a basic level, the attunement is a sort of ritual in which the teacher opens the student up to the flow of Reiki. And as I mentioned earlier, different teachers have different perspectives. Some believe that students aren't able to channel Reiki at all before the attunement, while others see the attunement as a way of really strengthening that flow of Reiki within us. So in terms of potential challenges, some students experience the energy to be rather overwhelming. So it could leave you feeling maybe mildly anxious or a little bit restless or antsy, that sort of thing. But more often what I see is that following the attunement process, students aren't given enough support in integrating that into their life. So more than having some sort of really extreme experience, more often it just kind of fades and they aren't able to really bring that energy into their day-to-day life. So, and there are various practices that people can use. One of the things in the book that I really focus on is how to do exactly that, how to transition from, wow, I had this amazing experience in the attunement, to, okay, now I have to, do the laundry and go to work. And how do I keep this energy alive in my life?
Is that like for most people a stumbling block for them where they come up and they're like, wow, I'm feeling this great energy and I've got to do this work. How am I going to make this all work? How am I going to balance this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common, especially because a lot of times Reiki practice, or in some cases just spiritual practice in general, is something that we might see as, oh, the special thing that I do at these special times. And in that case, yeah, it can be really hard to think of how do we fit this into an already really busy schedule for most of us. But when we really start to see Reiki as something that exists in every moment, no matter where we are or what we're doing, and we learn just really simple techniques for kind of amplifying or tapping into that Reiki that's already there, I find that to be a really great way of just experiencing Reiki all the time without having to do all these, special bells and whistles techniques.
Well, I think that's really encouraging for people because when, they look at this and like, oh, I'm going to have to face some of these challenges and some of these things that come up, it's not as daunting, I think, as a lot of people will think. It's something you just walk through on a daily basis.
Yes. And with Reiki, what I have found, too, is that Reiki will only bring to the surface the things that we are well-equipped and ready to deal with in that moment. I have never found Reiki to overwhelm someone with information or energies that they're just not prepared to handle in that moment. Now, of course, we can put ourselves in situations where maybe we are amping up the energy a little bit too much, but if we're really using Reiki in the way that it was traditionally used, that has never been something that I've experienced. Reiki just meets us right where we are in that moment and gives us precisely what we need in that place.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, and I know in your book you also talk about archetypes, and I'd love for you to explain what those are and how this, kind of dovetails with living Reiki.
Yeah, sure. So I see archetypes as these, you might think of them as categories of experience, things like love, faith, and they exist, I believe, following the work of Carl Jung, in the collective unconscious. So, for example, if we take the archetype of the mother represents all of the different ways that we could experience the energy of the mother. However, when we come down into this physical form and we experience, for example, our biological mother, that experience might be very, very different from the infinite potential of the archetype of the mother. So based on our individual life experiences, our experience of that energy might have, again, like a lot of twists and turns, or maybe some blind spots and some hiccups in certain areas. And so one of the ways that I find Reiki to be really powerful is it can heal our relationship to these archetypes so that we are no longer limited in experiencing these really powerful fundamental energies based solely on our past experience in this life. So it will expand our potential to experience this mother energy, which one really practical way that this affects our life is that it can help to heal our relationship with our biological mother. But it goes much beyond that, too, because the archetype of the mother, I mean, this deals with things like creativity and nourishment that go beyond just that human relationship. So the archetypes, they're just so powerful. There's these energies that essentially you could think of them as the paints that we're using to create the tapestry of our life. So if our paint tubes only have like a tiny little smidgen of the original paint in it, we're just limited in what we can create. But Reiki can help us, again, reconnect with the original archetype so that we're painting with the full range of colors.
As you were doing your research for Living Reiki, was there anything that surprised you or that came up and you're like, gosh, this is very important. We've got to include this?
One of the things related to the Reiki symbols. So I mentioned earlier that when I was originally taught the symbols, it was almost like they were just this, little drawing that you do in the air, maybe on a piece of paper to kind of activate the energy or maybe strengthen the energy a little bit. But we didn't really go much beyond that. But as I was doing my research, particularly there was a book, The Inner Heart of Reiki by Franz Stina, and he really gets into looking at Reiki as a means of remembering the true self, and the symbols are seen essentially as guideposts on this path of remembrance of the true self. So just looking at this different perspective of Reiki, that inspired me to start really meditating on the symbols and not just taking them at face value. And again, it just opened up this whole universe of experience with Reiki energy that I had never even thought of before in working with the symbols. So that was really, really interesting and really valuable.
Well, to kind of piggyback on that, in your book you talk about conscious clearing,
Yeah.
and how does that all relate?
Yeah, so one way to relate that, well, let's back up and talk about what is conscious clearing. So this is actually very similar to what we were just talking about with the archetypes. So you can think of our energy system as being constructed of, let's use the metaphor of pipes, like plumbing pipes. And over time, for various reasons, those pipes can become clogged or even kind of bent out of shape, making it really difficult for energy to flow through these pathways. So conscious clearing is a practice that really allows us to, first of all, recognize where these obstructions are happening, because sometimes we're just so used to it that we don't realize that we're having to do all these workarounds to, get around a possible obstruction. So we recognize them, but then we have these tools, and to bring back what we were talking earlier about an attunement is one powerful way of doing this, of really clearing out those pipes so that the energy can run more freely through there. And energy, we can think of this too, the work of Cindy Dale, a really famous energy worker. She calls energy information that vibrates, and I love this. So when we think of conscious clearing, when we're actually allowing more energy to flow through us, we have at our disposal more information, which can be information about ourselves. That's really important, maybe in making decisions in our life, and information about other people in the world around us that can support us in building healthier relationships. So it's just such a powerful practice that affects all areas of our life.
What if someone's having a difficulty understanding if they need to be doing some clearing on themselves or not? They're not really sure, like, should I be doing this? Should I not? What's a sign that they might need to be doing that?
So probably one of the signs that I see most often, both in my own life and with clients, is this sense that you're essentially paddling upstream in life. You don't have this sense of being supported or guided. When we've gone through conscious clearing or some similar process, the way that I experience it is there's this kind of energetic momentum to the things that I do. I feel like I'm guided and supported, like I'm riding this river of the divine, so to speak. And when I'm not feeling that, when things are just like everything just seems to take so much energy and it's just nothing's really working with any sort of ease, that's when I know I'm like, oh, okay, I need to go back and do some clearing here. So that's something I think a lot of people can probably recognize in their own life, where it just feels like things are not working very well. It's just they can't seem to maybe get projects started, or once they get started, they can't, bring them to fruition, that sort of thing. And another sign, too, is, for me, is if there's a feeling of resentment to a lot of things that you're doing. And it can be subtle, but just, I don't want to have to do this, or, I don't want to say yes to this. That is another sign for me that we've got some stuff that just needs to be cleared out.
I think a lot of people, as they think throughout their day, they're like, I might need some clearing then,
Yeah.
Because it's really difficult at times to kind of feel like you're getting in the zone, to be able to move the energy, or to just keep peeling back those layers of continuous work that we do in ourselves. So you look at this, you're like, I don't know about this,
Sure. Yeah, I think too, again, coming back to this self-compassion, and just knowing, so let's weave this in with one of the 5 precepts. So the 5 precepts, they're really brief, so I'll state them all. It's just for today: do not anger, do not worry, be grateful, do your duties fully, and be kind to others. So the first phrase, just for today, that to me is one of the most important parts of the precepts, because it's really this reminder that we're human and our best is going to vary from moment to moment, day to day, and that's okay. So we certainly don't need to be in this blissed out state of enlightenment all the time. I mean, that's just not realistic, at least not for me or anyone I've ever met. But that's okay. I mean, we can still just engage these practices as the best that we're able from day to day, and that's more than enough.
So no pressure.
No pressure, truly no pressure. I mean, this is a process that's meant to be lived. It's not this static ideal. And in the living of it, life is just messy. It's beautifully messy, and that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And to me, that's precisely how Reiki practice is supposed to be as well.
Yeah, it's kind of this, because it's so organic and it gets messy, and it's okay. Life isn't colored in between the lines,
Absolutely.
Well, and so what final thoughts do you want, for people that are picking up Leaving Reiki, what kind of thoughts do you want to leave them with?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is just this idea of the true self. So this is this part within us that is beneath, again, all of the layers of persona and roles, and the should-dos and the have-tos. And one of the things that it's hard for me this has been something that in my own life I had to come to this realization, but when I meet people who don't realize that they have this true self, they don't know their own value, their own brilliance, they're not aware of how important their unique gifts are in the world. I just want to leave those people with the truth that no one else can replace you. We all have this divine jewel inside of us. In fact, this divine jewel, I believe, it's who we really are. And everyone has these amazing gifts and wisdom that I hope through whatever practice, whether it's Reiki or something else, that we learn how to express in this life. Because again, no one can replace any of us. We all have these unique gifts to bring into this world. And I hope that anyone who reads this book, or again, through any other method, comes to really know their true self and just puts it out there, isn't afraid to live from that place.
Well, I think that's very powerful, Melissa. And my goodness, your book, Living Reiki, is just a fabulous book and gives such great action. Yes, I'm sure you're very proud as an author. I'd love to hear where our listeners can connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work.
Absolutely. So I have a practice here in Missouri called Life Alchemy Massage Therapy, and people can learn more about that through my website. It's getmomassage.com. I also have another website with a lot of distance Reiki treatments and tarot readings, that sort of thing, and it's yogiwitch.com.
at both those places. And do you work with people remotely or just within your area?
I do. I offer distance Reiki sessions and also distance tarot readings, and I combine the two in a tarot reading that utilizes Reiki healing on whatever issues we unearth in the tarot reading.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun talking to you.
Well, thank you, Melissa. It has been such a joy to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Living Reiki. Again, you can pick up Melissa's book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.